Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of sources and extract the most important nuggets of knowledge to get you well-informed, fast. Today, we're diving into a truly epic relationship.
Yeah, epic is the word.
The millennia-long, often dramatic, and deeply intertwined history between China and Japan.
It's a foundational relationship, really. It shaped both nations profoundly, and, it continues to reverberate on the global stage. Our deep dive today is primarily guided by Ezra F. Vogel's China and Japan Facing History.
A fantastic source.
It really digs into their historical contact, the mutual influences, and, those periods of intense conflict.
So our mission for you, the listener, is to understand how these two titans of East Asia have learned from each other, fought against each other, and fundamentally transformed each other over, 1,500 years?
At least, yeah. It's a story of really deep cultural borrowing, surprising power shifts, and a dynamic that's still very much evolving today.
And by the end, you'll grasp why leaders on both sides have, for a long time now, insisted on dealing properly with history to improve their shared future.
Right, that phrase keeps coming up.
Okay, let's journey back, way back, to the earliest documented phases of this relationship. This is the period, you could say, where Japan was primarily the eager student and China was the great teacher.
Precisely. You really see this dynamic emerge around 503 AD. Empress Suko, a powerful ruler of Japan's early Yamato clan, she wanted to expand her control, modernize her state.
And she looked across the water.
Exactly. She wisely recognized China's advanced civilization, especially the newly unified Sui dynasty under Emperor Wendi, as a potent model for governance, for culture, the works.
And Japan wasn't shy about it. They sent their first official mission to China in 600 AD.
Kicking off centuries, literally centuries, of intense learning and exchange.
Right, and it wasn't just direct contact, was it? Korea played a role.
A huge role. Korea, being geographically closer, often served as a crucial intermediary. We see archaeological evidence, like Chinese goods and Japanese burial mounds, indicating this transfer.
How early are we talking?
As early as 1000 BC, during Japan's Yayoi period, things like rice agriculture, metal tools, vital stuff likely came via Korea first.
So beyond those early material goods, what fundamental aspects of Japanese society were transformed during this foundational period?
Oh, the transformation was comprehensive. Japan adopted Chinese models for governance, law, institutions.
A whole structure.
Pretty much. Chinese writing became absolutely central to Japan's written history. Empress Suiko and her nephew, Prince Shotoku, they were key in introducing and expanding Buddhism.
Why Buddhism specifically?
They saw it partly as a means to encourage social order, and even Chinese architecture made its way over. A lot of the advances in Nara, Japan's ancient capital, actually stemmed from Korean immigrants who were more familiar with these Chinese developments.
It's fascinating, not just the practical stuff, but culture, too. You mentioned oral legends like Sufu's quest for Qinshi Wangdi's elixir. Even those reached Japan.
Shows the depth of the cultural reach, doesn't it? And of course, Chinese characters. They became central to written history, leading to monumental works like the Kojiki in 712 and Nihon Shoki in 720.
Which were modeled on Chinese histories.
Directly modeled after Chinese dynastic histories. Crucial for legitimizing the emperor, forging a common Japanese culture. And woodblock printing from China helps spread all this.
Okay, so culture, administration.
Yeah.
What about the military side? Learning happens through conflict too, right?
Absolutely. A critical moment came in 663 AD. Japan sent a huge force, maybe 27,000 troops, to help its ally, the Paekche Kingdom in Korea.
Against who?
Against the combined forces of China's powerful Tang dynasty and the Korean Silla Kingdom. And, it was a disaster for Japan.
Ow.
Crushing defeat. They lost something like 400 ships, 10,000 men. The Kojiki itself attributes this loss to Chinese numerical and technological superiority, especially their mass infantry tactics.
A harsh lesson.
A very harsh lesson. It immediately prompted Japan to adopt a conscription system, much like China's, by 670 AD, learning the hard way.
So by the time Japan stopped sending these formal missions to China, in 838 AD.
Yeah, they'd kind of absorbed what they felt they needed for that phase. They'd laid the foundations for a centralized political structure, a distinct national identity. They even adopted the term Tenno.
Heavenly Lord.
Right, Tenno for their emperor. And this was a significant assertion. It signified equality with the Chinese Tianzi, the son of heaven, not subordination.
Interesting. So even while learning, they were asserting their own status.
Exactly. This initial period wasn't just about copying. It laid the psychological groundwork for how Japan would eventually see itself relative to China as an equal, even as it selectively borrowed, forging its own path.
Okay, so after 838 AD, that really active direct learning seems to taper off. What happens over the next, 1,000 years? Why wasn't there that same level of transformative influence?
It's a fascinating dynamic, actually, because for a full millennium, roughly 838 to 1862, neither country was fundamentally transformed by learning from the other in that same comprehensive way.
Relations continued, though.
Oh yeah, but they shifted. Periods of no tributary relations, then formal tributary ties, then no official contacts at all, often driven by China's insistence on its traditional tribute system.
Which Japan wasn't always keen on.
Increasingly irksome for Japan, yeah. China, for instance, famously refused Japanese trade missions in 1380 unless Japan accepted the system, which China saw as acknowledging Japanese subordination.
And Japan's internal situation was changing, too.
Big time. This period saw Japan's internal unification under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a figure of immense ambition, a bit like China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, in a way.
Ambition aimed outwards.
Definitely. Hideyoshi invaded Korea from 1592 to 1597, and his explicit intention, documented, was to move on to conquer China itself, shows Japan's growing regional aspirations.
Wow. And during those invasions in Korea, wasn't there that really interesting clash of technologies?
Yes, get this. Hideyoshi's troops were using muskets, technology they'd learned from Europeans.
Right, the Portuguese initially.
While the Chinese forces, coming to help Korea, deployed cannons they had learned to make from, also, the Portuguese.
A clash of imported tech.
Exactly. It wasn't just a detail. It powerfully illustrated how external influences were already reshaping East Asian power dynamics centuries before the West's full impact, foreshadowed a whole new era.
So after Hideyoshi's death, Tokugawa Ieyasu unified Japan.
Right, establishing what's often called centralized feudalism, tight national control via the shogunate, but it also fostered strong local development, economic growth, a surprisingly high literacy rate.
Which would be important later.
Hugely important advantages when Japan faced Western pressures down the line.
And during this Tokugawa era, Japan kept asserting its independence symbolically, right? Like refusing Chinese calendar names.
Absolutely, a crucial symbolic act. Refusing to acknowledge Chinese imperial superiority, even while Nagasaki remained this tightly controlled hub for trade and information from China, sort of designated Chinatown to manage interactions.
But they still respected Chinese culture.
Deeply. That's what's so interesting. Despite avoiding political subordination, Japanese scholars, artists, Buddhists, even doctors and farmers continue to learn from Chinese texts, from expatriates in Nagasaki, studying law, philosophy, history.
But Japanese nationalism was growing too.
Yes, a unique Japanese nationalism, this idea of Japan as the land of the gods, reinforced by the kamikaze, the divine winds that helped repel the Mongol invasions,
Right.
led some to believe their civilization was inherently superior, especially when they viewed the Qing dynasty, led by Manchus from outside the traditional heartland, as barbarian-led.
So this millennium saw Japan kind of finding its own identity.
Yeah, affirming its distinct identity while still selectively drawing from China, but never again fully submitting to Chinese cultural or political dominance, a really complex balancing act.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. Because by the 1860s, everything changes again. Both nations face immense pressure from the West, forcing them to resume official contacts after 2 centuries.
Right. You had China's Tongzi Restoration starting in 1861, trying to rebuild strength after the Opium Wars, the Taiping Rebellion. Huge crises.
And in Japan.
The Meiji Restoration in 1868 overthrew the shogun, established a new government focused explicitly on modernization. But crucially, their approaches were quite different.
How so?
Well, China sent its Burlingame mission in the late 1860s to the U.S. and Europe. They observed industry, asked sharp questions.
Like the one about missionaries and Chinese workers in California.
Exactly. Zhigang's diary from that mission shows they were really trying to understand the new Western systems, the machinery, the science.
But Japan's approach was bigger scale.
Much bigger scale. The Iwakura mission, 1871 to 1873. This was a grand tour. Loads of young, influential officials visiting 15 countries.
15.
Their mission was explicit. Methodically study everything. Government, military, education, industry. Bring back global knowledge directly.
And this direct observation led to that really striking moment in Shanghai, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did. When the Iwakura mission visited Shanghai later, their chief chronicler, Kume Kunitake, was reportedly, well, shocked. Struck by how much China had fallen behind, he wrote. Noted the lack of sewers, the seeming unconcern.
That must have shattered some illusions.
Absolutely. Powerfully challenged any lingering Japanese ideas about Chinese sophistication. Underscored the diverging paths the two nations were taking.
And Japan was rapidly modernizing its military at this time, too.
Very rapidly. Take Oyama Iwao. He studied the French army during the Franco-Prussian War, then came back to shape the modern Japanese army. Required officers to study laws of war, supported adhering to the Geneva Convention.
Why the focus on laws of war?
It was a conscious effort to be seen as a legitimate global power, playing by the emerging international rules.
So by the 1870s, Japan's actively seeking diplomatic relations with China. Not just out of politeness, right?
No, strategic reasons too. They saw China as a massive potential market, maybe even an ally against shared Western challenges. Li Hongzhang, a key Chinese official, actually admired Japan's ability to limit Western activities more effectively at that point.
And then came that moment with Sojima in 1873, the audience with the emperor.
A huge moment for asserting Japan's new status. Sojima, the Japanese official, was the first Japanese in modern times to have an audience with the Chinese emperor, and he famously refused to perform the kowtow.
The full prostration.
Yeah, he argued for diplomatic equality for foreign emissaries. This wasn't just etiquette, it was a clear declaration. Japan was on the world stage now, and the old tributary system was over.
Okay, so Japan's modernizing fast, asserting itself. China's starting to see it maybe as a model. How did China grapple with learning from its, traditional junior partner, and where did these new dynamics first clash?
Korea. Korea became the crucible, absolutely. China still officially held suzerainty over Korea power over foreign policy, not so much domestic stuff, but they hadn't really exercised it for centuries.
But Japan's ambitions were growing there.
Right, especially after they forced Korea to sign the Kangwa Treaty in 1876. That pushed China to take a more active role, which led directly to increasing rivalry between China and Japan over influence in Korea.
And this rivalry tragically led to the Sino-Japanese War.
1894-1895, a truly crucial turning point.
And a disaster for China.
A crushing defeat. Li Hongzhang, China's lead negotiator, had to sign the humiliating Treaty of Shimonoseki, ceded Taiwan to Japan, allowed Japan to occupy the area around Shenyang.
The Manchu homelands.
Exactly, a direct humiliation for the Qing dynasty. And Li, who'd spent decades trying to strengthen China, was unfairly scapegoated.
And Vogel calls this war a remarkable turnabout. A reversal of that cultural flow.
Completely. It was a profound psychological blow. Suddenly, China was looking to Japan as a mediator of modern global culture. They adopted the Learn from Japan policy.
Which must have been incredibly difficult psychologically.
Immense. It completely upended the traditional power dynamics, forced China to confront this new reality where its ancient regional dominance was just gone, challenged by its former student. A pivotal moment reshaping their relationship and each nation's sense of self.
So this Learn from Japan policy, what did it look like in practice?
Well, it led to the first large-scale study abroad program anywhere in the world, actually. Thousands of Chinese students flocked to Japan.
Including some big future names.
Absolutely. Zhou Enlai, Chiang Kai-shek, Wang Jingwei. Future leaders went to study in Japan. And Japanese advisors were hired by China to help modernize people like Hattori Unokichi in education, Kawashima in police training.
But beneath this cooperation, tensions were still there. Some Chinese scholars see a long-term Japanese plan.
Yeah, some do view Japan's actions from Hideyoshi's invasion centuries earlier right up to the Sino-Japanese War as this continuous aggressive plan to conquer China.
Do mainstream historians agree?
Mostly no. They don't find strong evidence of some single integrated long-term plan spanning centuries. But there were definitely aggressive factions within Japan gaining influence.
Like that incident in Nagasaki in 1886.
Right. China's modern Beiyang fleet visited Nagasaki, showing off its new superior warships like the Dingwan. Impressive stuff.
But it backfired.
Completely unintended consequence. Japan saw that power and immediately started building 3 large cruisers to match it, directly fueled an arms race.
And Japan's military was gathering intelligence.
Diligently, serving military facilities, infrastructure in China. Then by 1931, you have these right-wing radicals within Japan's Kwantung army stationed in Manchuria.
The ones who staged the Manchurian incident.
Exactly. Blew up a section of railway track, used it as a pretext to seize control of all of Manchuria. Then they installed China's last emperor, Puyi, as a puppet ruler.
And Tokyo let this happen.
Well, this period saw increasing insubordination within the Japanese military, and Tokyo often overlooked it, partly because of strong anti-China feeling among the public back home.
Combined with China's weakness.
Exactly. China had a weak, fragmented government. So these incidents, the Jinan slaughter in 1928, assassinating the warlord Zhang Zuolin in 1928, they just steadily cleared the path towards a bigger, devastating war. It was this toxic mix. Japanese militarism, a weakened China, that flipped power dynamic, it all led to tragedy.
Which arrived in 1937, the full-scale Second Sino-Japanese War. Many advised Chiang Kai-shek China wasn't ready.
They did, but he declared it the duty of all Chinese to defend their country. He made that strategic decision, too, to make Shanghai the first major battleground.
Why Shanghai?
He believed losing the northern cities wouldn't be enough, but losing Shanghai, the international hub, would arouse public anger and really mobilize national support. And they adopted military strategist Zhang Bailey's concept of long resistance, trying to outlast Japan, draw them deep into China.
And the level of deception back then, that 1932 Shanghai incident.
Yeah, quite telling. Fierce fighting made Chinese General Kai a national hero. But later, at the Tokyo War Crimes trials, it came out it was staged by a Japanese major, Tanaka Rikichi.
Staged.
How? To deflect attention from what Japan was doing in Manchuria. He apparently even bribed some Chinese youths to help start the trouble. Shows the depths of manipulation, the manufactured pretexts used for aggression, left a really bitter legacy of distrust.
The war itself.
Yeah.
Devastating. And complex events like the Nanjing Massacre.
Devastating beyond measure, yes. And Nanjing shows the complexities. You had that small group of foreigners led by the German Siemens guy, John Rabe.
Trying to set up a safety zone.
Right, trying to establish a neutral safety zone to protect civilians. But the Japanese refused to formally recognize it, though they said they'd try to respect it if militarily possible. And it got complicated when the Chinese General Tang wouldn't remove his soldiers from the zone, challenging its neutrality right away. Horrific situation.
How did the war impact China internally? The nationalists versus the communists.
Hugely important shift. The communists, based out in Yan'an, skillfully used the war. Resisting Japan was way more popular than their old fight against landlords.
He gave them legitimacy.
Immense legitimacy. They gained huge popularity appealing to peasants' promises of land reform, respectful treatment. A stark contrast to the nationalists, who were really struggling with corruption, maintaining discipline. This period was absolutely pivotal in the communists' eventual rise to power.
So after Japan's surrender in 1945, how did the Japanese public react?
Well, they'd been largely shielded from the worst atrocities by wartime media control. So the reaction was mostly blaming the militarists and the politicians. There was a strong feeling that Japan had paid an enormous price and a real determination to pursue peace.
But the Tokyo war crimes trials were controversial.
Very controversial in Japan. While atrocities like Nanjing and the horrific Unit 731 experiments were acknowledged, many Japanese felt it was victor's justice.
Pointing to Allied actions.
Yeah, things like the atomic bombings, which weren't prosecuted. And the dissent by the Indian judge, Radha Banod Pal, arguing the whole trial was invalid, that resonated strongly in Japan. So this post-war period left both nations with deep trauma, but also really different narratives about accountability. And those differences continue to shape things for decades.
Okay, so end of World War II, start of the Cold War, another new phase, now heavily influenced by the U.S.
Absolutely. After 1947, you get the U.S. reverse course. Washington starts seeing Japan not as a defeated enemy, but as a potential partner against the Soviet Union.
And the Yoshida Doctrine comes out of this.
Right. Allowed Japan to focus intensely on economic recovery, while the U.S. provided military security. The U.S. also effectively replaced Manchuria as Japan's main source for raw materials like iron ore, soybeans, big shift.
And Korea. A flashpoint again.
Always Korea, it seems. The Korean War, 1950-1953, China sends volunteers to fight the UN forces, mostly U.S. and South Korean troops, after UN forces crossed the 38th parallel into North Korea, pitted them against each other again, indirect.
But even without formal diplomatic ties during the Cold War, there were still connections.
Crucial unofficial channels. Japanese individuals like Takasaki Tatsunosuke, who'd actually headed Manchurian heavy industry during the war, worked with Chinese figures like Liao Chengji. Liao himself had studied in Japan.
Wow.
They worked to expand trade, leading to the Liao-Takasaki Agreement. And many older Japanese who had lived or worked in China before the war maintained these valuable connections. They were informal bridge builders.
Then comes that incredible diplomatic moment, Kissinger's secret trip to China in '71.
Oh, yeah. Prime Minister Sato in Japan was famously deeply embarrassed. Kissinger goes secretly, paves the way for Nixon to normalize relations with China, completely bypassing Japan.
Ouch.
A terrible embarrassment, as Vogel puts it. It spurred Japan to act fast, terrified of being left behind by its closest ally, the U.S., really underscored Japan's dependence and the shifting global dynamics.
So Japan moves quickly. Prime Minister Tanaka visits Beijing in 1972.
Normalizes relations. And during the negotiations, Mao Zedong himself meets Tanaka, famously downplays the term inconvenience for Japan's past aggression, trying to move forward.
And the Senkaku-Diaoyu Islands came up.
Tanaka asked about them. Zhou Enlai, the premier, famously replied something like, "It was better not to discuss the issue at that point. Kick the can down the road." That issue only really flared up much later when oil was discovered nearby.
Then Deng Xiaoping visits Japan in 1978. That must have been symbolic.
Hugely symbolic. Deng, a master political strategist, had personally fought the Japanese. Now he's visiting Japan, touring state-of-the-art factories like Kimitsu Steel.
Wearing a hard hat.
Yeah. Openly seeking Japanese help for China's modernization drive. A really pragmatic gesture from a former enemy, looking for expertise for China's future.
And this led to actual projects.
Massive cooperation. The Baoshan steel plant near Shanghai was a huge leapfrog project, using Japanese tech to rapidly boost China's industrial capacity. Japanese economic advisors like Okita Saburo shared their experience guiding Japan's own rapid growth. China found that model more suitable, maybe, than Western ones at the time.
So a period of pragmatic cooperation, despite the history.
Remarkable, really. A pivot towards economic interdependence, a shared vision of modernization, even with the wounds of war still there.
Okay, moving into the more modern era, after 1992, things seem to deteriorate again. Why?
Several factors, yeah. One big one was simply the loss of those key bridge builders, Deng Xiaoping, Tanaka, others who had managed the normalization.
New leaders were different.
New leaders like Jiang Zemin in China were perhaps more vulnerable to domestic criticism of being soft on Japan. Jiang's own father had business contacts with Japanese occupation officials during the war, adding a layer of complexity. They seemed less personally invested in promoting close ties.
And China launched that patriotic education campaign.
Right, in 1994. It explicitly used historical grievances, especially related to Japan's aggression, to foster national pride, national cohesion. This naturally intensified public awareness in China and demands for Japan to properly acknowledge the past.
This coincided with a huge economic shift too, didn't it?
Dramatic shift. China's economy starts booming, looks poised to overtake Japan's, which was kind of stagnating after its bubble burst in the early 90s.
The growing Chinese confidence.
And maybe corresponding fear, or at least unease, in Japan. A whole new power dynamic emerging.
How did this affect those shelved territorial disputes like the Senkaku-Diaoyu?
Tensions flared up significantly, especially after oil was discovered nearby, and then a Japanese youth group erected a lighthouse on one of the islands in 1996.
And the 2010 fishing boat incident.
Big standoff. Japan arrested a Chinese fishing boat captain near the islands. Intense protests from China, demands for his release. Japan eventually yielded under pressure. These incidents really highlighted the new geopolitical realities. China was much more assertive now.
But there were still efforts to improve things, like Prime Minister Moriyama in '95.
Yes, Moriyama made what Vogel calls a noble effort, offered a really heartfelt apology for Japan's aggression, visited the Marco Polo Bridge where the war effectively started to show empathy, a significant gesture.
And there was debate within China, too.
In the early 2000s, yeah. Some articles questioned the standard anti-Japan views. Ma Cheng wrote about new thinking on relations with Japan, noting that even though favorable impressions were declining, most Japanese people still wanted friendly relations. Even a Chinese TV series, Rise and Decline of the Great Powers, presented a surprisingly balanced view of Japan's industrialization.
And Prime Minister Abe's first trip in 2006.
Abe Shinzo, yeah. He broke tradition by making his first foreign visit as PM to Beijing, not Washington. He apologized for the enormous damage and pain Japan caused, and crucially, avoided visiting the controversial Yasukuni Shrine during that trip. Another significant gesture aimed at reconciliation.
But deep suspicion remains.
Oh, absolutely, a deep undercurrent. Chinese leaders still voice concern about a potential resurgence of Japanese militarism. They tend to see the U.S.-Japan alliance almost as a cork, keeping that in check.
And they want acknowledgement.
They believe Japan must acknowledge not just the past cruelties, but also China's current leading position in Asia. That's a key point of friction.
While Japan wants
Respect. While acknowledging China's size and importance, Japan desires to be treated with respect as a major nation in its own right. It kind of echoes Empress Suiko's stance over 1,000 years ago, wanting equal status.
So this tension between history, power, and respect continues.
It really defines the modern relationship. And yet, despite all the political tensions, the economic ties, the cultural exchanges, people-to-people stuff, it continues to grow. Millions of Chinese tourists visit Japan buying Japanese products.
And Japanese companies in China
Often have deeper local roots, tend to take a longer-term view of the market. It shows a certain resilience in the grassroots connections, even when state-to-state relations get rocky.
What an incredible journey. Centuries of interaction.
Yeah.
Japan learning from China, then China learning from Japan now. This complex relationship where China's clearly dominant. It's anything but simple.
It really isn't. It's a testament to how profoundly intertwined destinies can shift, requiring constant adaptation, this delicate balancing act between past and present.
It really demonstrates that while conflict has been a tragic recurring theme, so has profound cultural exchange and mutual respect, even if it's sometimes grudging.
Absolutely. Those shared foundations, writing, Buddhism, Confucianism, art, architecture, they still resonate. They form this broad base for potential cooperation, if national policies allow it.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Understanding this long, nuanced history reminds us that even nations this deeply intertwined can see dramatic shifts in power, in perception.
Right. And for these two East Asian giants, navigating their future together will require constantly facing their past, both the good parts and the bad, the cooperative and the confrontational, because those historical echoes, they're still very much present.
Okay, so here's a final provocative thought for you to consider.
Given their millennia of mutual influence and profound clashes, and with China now asserting its position as a global power, could China and Japan ever fully move beyond the historical baggage? Could they forge a genuinely equal, trusting partnership?
Or will the shadows of the past always shape their present and future, inevitably defining the limits of their cooperation? Something to think about.